Good evening. How's everybody doing? Great to be learning with you on a Wednesday, Yom Revi'i. Let's light up the darkness. Who's in the house? Joseph in Nevada, Bill in Mid-Missouri, Shandor in the Bronx, Guy in Ohio, Melissa in Great Neck, Bella in Florida, Sharon in New Jersey, Aoife in Florida, Alan in New York City, and Ilanit in Silver Spring, and Moshe in Las Vegas. Welcome, everybody. Is it streaming there? Yes, it's streaming on YouTube. Okay, and Belle in Virginia, where we celebrate our new grandson's bris. Mazel tov, mazel tov. Wonderful, what a simcha. Great to hear good news. Okay, our daf today is page 16 here in Tractate Makkos, the 25th volume of the Talmud. We're working our way through chapter 3. Today, with God's help, we'll complete our discussion of Mishnah number 1. Not easy stuff. Generally, the chapter is about lashes. When does flogging apply? But as we've seen, the laws are anything but simple about when flogging applies. General principle seems to be that if somebody violates a negative commandment, do not do this, and the person does it, and he was warned that if you do that, you'll be flogged, and then he does it anyway in the presence of witnesses, that flogging would apply, probably to a negative prohibition that would involve kares as its punishment. If the person, which is death at the hands of the heavenly court, where we've seen that both the death penalty at the hands of the heavenly court, kares, and flogging could apply, but for a transgression that would be liable to death at the hands of an earthly court, then we would not apply flogging. Yesterday it got more complex. We were talking about there's certain kinds of negative prohibitions. One kind of archetypal that we will discuss again today, the Pesach, bringing the Paschal lamb, right? When the temple is standing in Jerusalem, people register, groups of people agree to be a group together. They bring their Passover lamb. It is slaughtered in the courtyard of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem. Some blood sprinkled on the altar. Then they take it out to their picnic site, right? Wherever they are going to make their barbecue. They're going to roast that lamb. It cannot be boiled. It cannot be cooked in any other way but roasted. And then the Torah commands that you got to eat it that night. None of it shall be left over until the morning. So what if you do leave some over until the morning? Sounds like you violated a negative commandment. But not a flogging offense for two reasons. First of all, you didn't do anything. You violated because you didn't eat all of it. But it's not that you did something. It was a lack of eating that allowed some of it to be left over. And moreover, there's a positive commandment which comes to cure the negative breach, which is in the morning, if something is left over, you burn it. You have to burn it. Then if you left some over and you didn't burn it, then would flogging apply? Sounds like if the positive mitzvah to cure the transgression of a negative commandment is written in the Torah after the negative commandment, then no, there's no flogging because the cure or the consequence is that your liability to fulfill that positive commandment. But if the positive commandment is stated first, then it seems, and the person goes ahead and is warned and violates the negative commandment, then flogging would apply or might apply. Okay, that's some of the nuances that we got into yesterday. And then we got at where we left off was a debate between Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish about uncertain warning. Now, this was in the context of a man who is not permitted to divorce his wife because he raped her when she was a virgin. And it could also be a seduction, but let's say it was a rape, and yet she chose to marry him. That was her choice. And now he has to support her for the rest of his life, and he is not permitted to divorce her. But what if he does divorce her? So then he violated the negative commandment, do not divorce her. So if he was warned and he did it anyway, is that a flogging offense? Sounds like no, because he can remarry her to cure the breach, so to speak, unless he's a priest. Then after he divorces her, he can't remarry her because a priest can't marry a divorced woman. So then, since he cannot cure it by remarrying her, he would be flogged. Now, what about the warning that would pertain here? If you say to him after he divorces her, or let's say before you divorce her, if you divorce her, then you're going to be subject to flogging. But why? If he divorces her, he could remarry her. So the warning is an uncertain warning, and then Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish are going to disagree on the outcome of this. So let's just talk about an uncertain warning first before we get into today's reading. Where did the law come out regarding uncertain warning? With regard to one who violates a prohibition that entails fulfillment of a positive mitzvah that rectifies it, and who was forewarned in the following manner. Do not perform that action, like divorce your wife for the situation of a man who's not permitted to divorce his wife. The warning was, do not perform that action. As, if you do so, and then you fail to fulfill the positive mitzvah, which could be remarrying her, then you will be flogged. Right? You violated a commandment, and then if you neglect to do the correction through the positive mitzvah, then you will be subject to lashes. So then, if he violates the prohibition and he does not fulfill the mitzvah, the positive mitzvah, he is flogged. Although the forewarning is uncertain, because he could do the positive mitzvah and thereby avoid the lashes, so it's an uncertain warning in that sense. Although the forewarning is uncertain, as if he performs the mitzvah, he will be exempt from the lashes, nevertheless, an uncertain warning of this sort is characterized as a forewarning in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan, and therefore, if lashes only apply to somebody who violates a negative commandment who was forewarned that if he violates it, he will be subject to lashes, in this case, it would apply, per the opinion of Rabbi Yochanan. That's where the law ended up. Okay, let's keep that in our minds as we now dive in at the very bottom of page 15b. We're going to do a single daf today. Tomorrow, God willing, we'll do a double. Change of plan. I told you that we were going to have class an hour early tomorrow. That was because I had a fundraiser that I needed to go to. But the organization that is hosting that fundraiser postponed it by 1 month because they found themselves in competition with another organization hosting a fundraiser on the same night. So we'll have that, class 1 hour early in a month. I think it's on June 4th will be the date. But of course, we'll give you notice as we get closer to that. But the point is that tomorrow's class, regular time, 6 p.m. Pacific. Okay, bottom of 15b. And they follow their standard lines of reasoning, as it was stated that Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish disagreed in a case where one said, on my oath, I will eat this loaf today. And then the day passed and he did not eat it, right? So this guy swore that he would eat a loaf and then he didn't eat it. He violated his own oath. Now, an oath is something that you become obligated in. The sages look down on oaths because you didn't have to have an obligation. You did not have an obligation to eat that loaf of, let's say, bread on this day. God did not command you to do that. But you took an oath upon yourself that you would eat it. So now you changed your own reality because we're not allowed to make oaths and then not fulfill them. So if you took this oath and then he didn't eat it, the day passed, he did not eat it. So about this situation, Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish both say he is not flogged. Why would we even think that he would be flogged? Well, because he violated his own oath. When you make an oath, you become obligated to fulfill it. So if you don't fulfill your obligation, you might be subject to lashes. But both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish say no. He is not flogged for taking a false oath. And they disagree with regard to the reason that he is not flogged. Rabbi Yochanan says he is not flogged, now we're on 16a, because it is a prohibition that does not involve an action. He violates the oath by failing to perform the action that he promised to do, rather than by performing an action. And we have a principle that with regard to any prohibition that does not involve an action, one is not flogged for its violation. Reish Lakish, the younger colleague, and very much a colleague, right? Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish so often occur together, and they debate lots of different issues. And generally, we follow Rabbi Yochanan, who was Reish Lakish's teacher before he was his colleague. So Reish Lakish says he is not flogged. They agree on that, but for a different reason. Because the forewarning in this case is an uncertain forewarning. One cannot properly forewarn him before he takes the oath, because as long as time remains in the day, he can still eat the loaf at a later time and fulfill the oath. And any uncertain warning is not characterized as a forewarning, since at the time that you give him the warning, it may or may not, come to fruition. He might have a correction by fulfilling his oath. You can't call that a warning. Now, obviously, what you said to him is, listen, if you take that oath to eat that piece of bread today, and then the day passes and you didn't eat it, you will have violated your oath, and you will have taken a false oath. Why does that not count as a forewarning? Is it really an uncertain forewarning? So says Reish Lakish, yes, that's an uncertain forewarning. The Gemara adds, and both Rabbi Yochanan and Reish Lakish hold in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. As it is taught in a Baraisa, it is stated with regard to the Paschal offering, the Pesach, and you shall let nothing of it remain until the morning. And that which remains of it until the morning, you shall burn in fire. That's very God's sort of understanding people and how imperfect we are. You shall not do that. Okay, but if you don't follow my orders and you violate, then this is how you will deal with that situation. So the verse comes to position the positive mitzvah, the correction for violating the negative mitzvah. You left some over until the morning, so then you're going to burn it. Right? So the verse comes to position the positive mitzvah of burning the leftover flesh of the lamb, or of the sheep or of a goat, after the prohibition against leaving over that flesh beyond the morning. To say, why does the Torah do this? To tell us that one is not flogged for its violation. You don't get flogged for leaving some over until the morning because you have the corrective measure of burning it in the morning. Meaning that in the absence of such a correction, you would be flogged, with warning, of course. Now, Rabbi, one is not flogged for its violation. This is the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. Now, Rabbi Yochanan inferred this from the statement of Rabbi Yehuda. The reason he is not flogged is that the verse comes and positions the mitzvah after the prohibition. But if the verse had not come and positioned the mitzvah of burning it after the prohibition of leaving it after the morning, then he would have been flogged. So apparently, uncertain forewarning is characterized as forewarning, as he can be forewarned not to leave over the flesh of the offering, even though he would not be flogged were he to burn it. And Reish Lakish inferred this. The reason he is not flogged is that the verse comes and positions the mitzvah after the prohibition, but if the verse had not come and positioned the mitzvah after the prohibition, he would have been flogged. So apparently one is flogged even for violating a prohibition that does not involve an action, as he violates the prohibition without performing an action, right? It's that fails to eat the whole thing. That's not an action, that's an omission. So it sounds like you could have flogging for failing to do something rather than only for doing the wrong thing. The Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, also known as Reish Lakish, also, this is certainly a case of uncertain warning. Why then does he not conclude, based on Rabbi Yehuda's statement, that uncertain forewarning is characterized as forewarning? And the Gemara answers, he holds in accordance with the opinion of the other Tana. In the name of Rabbi Yehuda, as it is taught in a Baraisa, if a woman was divorced and she remarried soon after, and a son was born 7 months after her remarriage, which would be 9 months after her divorce. In this situation, it is unclear whether this baby boy is the son of the first husband or of the second husband. And that is precisely why Jewish women are commanded by rabbinic decree to wait more than 3 months upon leaving one marriage, either through divorce or widowhood, before getting married again, so that we can be sure that if she gets pregnant, the son will be from the second husband and not have this doubtful situation where we don't know if it's the son of the first husband or the second husband. They didn't have genetic testing. Even though we do have genetic testing now, we would still leave the law on the books, like so many other laws that have come to, be the law over time. And we don't change them just because technology has brought differences, generally speaking. We won't get into that topic now. The point is that here we have a doubt, a suffix, doubt, about whether her son is the son of her previous husband or her current husband. Why does that matter? So in that case, if when this boy grows up and he hits the husband of his mother, and then he hits that other husband, or if he cursed this husband and then cursed that one, and likewise if he struck both of them simultaneously or cursed both of them simultaneously, he is liable for striking or cursing his father, right? He doesn't know which one of them is his father. Could be the second husband of his mother or the first. But if he hits both of them in the face, well, then we can be sure that he struck his father and he violated the very strong prohibition, in fact, a death penalty offense, against striking your father. If a man strikes his father, that actually is a death penalty offense. Violates the 5th commandment, to honor your mother and your father. Now, what's interesting here is if he had only struck one of them, would we say that he's liable to the death penalty for striking his father? Certainly not, because we don't know if he struck his father or not. Well, if he strikes both of them, well, then he certainly did strike his father. But it's not so simple. Rabbi Yehuda says, if he cursed or struck both of them simultaneously, then he is liable. But if he cursed or struck them one after the other, even if he was forewarned prior to cursing or striking each of them, he is exempt from punishment. Why? Apparently, Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that one is not flogged after uncertain warning, since in this case it is impossible to determine which of them is the father. Inevitably, the forewarning is uncertain. Now, you can say if he was warned before striking each of them, then the totality of the situation requires us to say that, well, he did strike his father because he struck both of them and one of them is his father. And he was warned before each of the strikes. So therefore, he was warned and then he struck his father. He should be liable to the consequences. But each time he was warned, it was an uncertain warning because you don't know if the one he's striking is the father. And therefore, because it's an uncertain warning, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it must be that Rabbi Yehuda doesn't believe in the validity of an uncertain warning, and that's why this boy would be exempt, even though he was warned and then struck the first husband, and then he was warned and struck the second husband, still he is exempt. The Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Yochanan, also this is certainly a case of a prohibition that does not involve in. Wait a minute, what? Whoa. Let me go back. Rabbi Yehuda says inevitably the forewarning is uncertain. Okay, yes, I was in the right place. So now the Gemara asks, and according to Rabbi Yochanan also, this is certainly a case of a prohibition that does not involve an action. Prohibition that does not involve an action. We can't be talking about the boy who strikes his father in the face. It must be we're going back to the oath of somebody who says, I will eat this loaf today, and then he doesn't eat it. So, it's a prohibition that does not involve an action. Why then does he not conclude, based on Rabbi Yehuda's statement, that one is flogged for violating a prohibition of that kind? And the Gemara answers, Rabbi Yochanan holds in accordance with that which was cited in the name of Rav Idi bar Avin. And Rav Idi bar Avin says that Rav Amram says that Rabbi Yitzchak says that Rabbi Yochanan says that Rabbi Yehuda says in the name of Rabbi Yosei HaGalili. Beautiful, keeping track of who heard from whom. With regard to any prohibition in the Torah, if it is a prohibition that involves an action, one is flogged for its violation. If it is a prohibition that does not involve an action, one is not flogged for its violation. Except for one who takes a false oath. One who substitutes a non-sacred animal for a sacrificial animal, saying this animal is substituted for that one. And one who curses another while invoking the name of God. In those three instances, the perpetrator is flogged, even though he performed no physical action. Right? It was just designating one animal for another with words, or speaking a false oath. That again was words, or cursing someone by blaspheming God. Again, just words. So the Gemara asks, although the difficulties that were raised with regard to the opinions of Rabbi Yochanan Reish Lakish were answered, the apparent contradiction from one statement of Rabbi Yehuda to another statement of Rabbi Yehuda is the difficulty we have now. So the Gemara cited contradictory statements of Rabbi Yehuda with regard to lashes, both in the case of a prohibition that does not involve an action and in the case of uncertain warning. Sounds like you could take a statement of Rabbi Yehuda to come up with either outcome. Contradiction. So what's happening? And the Gemara answers, if it is according to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish, Reish Lakish, the contradiction may be resolved with the explanation that the two sources reflect the opinions of two Tanaim, who disagree in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda. If it is according to Rabbi Yochanan, the contradiction is not difficult, as this baraisa reflects his opinion that one is flogged for violating a prohibition that involves an action, and that baraisa reflects the opinion of his teacher, Rabbi Yosei HaGalili, who holds that one is not flogged for violating a prohibition that involves an action. New subject. We learn in a Mishna there on page 17a, with regard to one who takes the mother bird with her fledglings. Okay, so there's a law in the Torah, very interesting law, that if you take a mother bird from the nest, you can't take the babies. Or if you take the babies, you have to shoo away the mother. Mainly that you have to shoo away the mother before you take the eggs or even the chicks from the nest. Don't be cruel, shoo her away. Okay, what about this? So with regard to one who takes the mother bird with her fledglings, thereby violating the Torah prohibition, you shall not take the mother with her fledglings. You shall send the mother, and the fledglings you may take for yourself. Okay, so you can take the chicks, but you have to shoo away the mother first, and you can't take the chicks and the mother. And by the way, you can't, bring birds onto your property so that they reproduce, and then you're able to fulfill this mitzvah.
This actually has to be a nest that you chance upon when you do this. Kind of very interesting law. Deuteronomy 22, 6 and 7. Now, Rabbi Yehuda says, in that case, he is flogged, right? If he took the mother and the fledglings, he violated that law. Rabbi Yehuda says he is flogged for taking the mother bird, and he does not send the mother. And the rabbis say he sends the mother and is not flogged, right? Because he has a way to correction. If you're going to warn him, say, don't take the mother and the chicks, right? You'll violate this law. But if you send the mother away, then you have not violated the law. So it sounds like there's a positive mitzvah adjacent to the negative commandment. Don't take the mother and the chicks. Do shoo the mother away. Rabbi Yehuda says, he is flogged for taking the mother bird and does not send the mother. And the rabbis say he sends the mother and is not flogged, as this is the principle. With regard to any prohibition that entails a command to arise and perform a mitzvah, one is not liable to receive lashes for its violation. Rabbi Yochanan says we have only this mitzvah and another where one would be flogged if not for the relevant mitzvah. Rabbi Elazar said to Rabbi Yochanan, which is that other mitzvah? And Rabbi Yochanan said to him, you will know when you discover it yourself. Rabbi Elazar went out, examined the matter, and he discovered the answer, as it is taught in a baraisa with regard to a rapist who divorced the woman that he raped. Right? He's not allowed to divorce her, but he did. If he is a non-priest, he remarries her, and he is not flogged for violating the prohibition. He may not send her away all of his days. And if he's a priest, he is flogged for violating the prohibition on divorcing her, but he does not remarry her because she's now a divorced woman. The Gemara states this works out well according to the one who teaches that the criterion for determining whether one is flogged for violating a prohibition that entails fulfillment of a positive mitzvah is whether he fulfilled the mitzvah or he did not fulfill the mitzvah. And if he does not fulfill the mitzvah, the corrective positive mitzvah, immediately when he is instructed to do so, then he is flogged when he fails to do so. Like he does the negative. When is the warning? The warning presumably is when he's about to do the negative commandment. And they say to him, listen, don't do that. It is prohibited to do that. If you do that, you're going to be subject to lashes. Now, he has a positive mitzvah that he can do in place of getting lashes. But if he doesn't do it right away, or if the warning is, I don't know if the warning is repeated, or if it's like the warning, don't do the negative thing, then he did it. And then it's like, well, if you don't do this positive corrective measure, you will be flogged. And then he doesn't do it, then we flog him. How much time does he have to do the positive rectification? Sounds like just has to happen right away after the warning, or he gets flogged. Bum, bum, bum. Right. But according to the one who teaches that the criterion for determining whether one is flogged in that case is whether he nullified the mitzvah or he did not nullify the mitzvah. And one is flogged only if he performed an action that renders it impossible to fulfill the mitzvah. So granted, with regard to sending away the mother bird from the nest, you can find a situation where he nullifies the mitzvah. For example, if he killed the mother bird, now he can no longer send her away. He nullified the mitzvah by making it impossible to fulfill the corrective mitzvah. But in the case of a rapist, if the criterion is whether he nullified the mitzvah or he did not nullify it, how can you find a situation where the man is flogged because he nullified any possibility of remarrying her? Unless he's, right, if he's not a priest, so the fact that he divorced her means now he's actually obligated to remarry her. What's going to stop him from remarrying her? I mean, if he murders her, okay, then he cannot remarry her, but now he's going to be subject to death penalty for murder. So that's not what we're talking about. But he could make it so that it's impossible for him to marry her. How would he do that? If he somehow acts as an agent and arranges for her to get betrothed. He's actively involved in getting her married to someone else. So then he took an action that made it impossible for him to marry her because now she's married to someone else. If he cannot remarry her because he killed her, he will be executed, not flogged. Based on the principle, he receives the greater punishment. Rav Shimon Makkos said he nullifies the possibility of remarriage in a case where he received on her behalf the money for betrothal from another man, thereby ensuring that his own remarriage to her is no longer an option. So Rav said that is not a viable solution. If his ex-wife designated him as an agent to receive the money of betrothal on her behalf, it is she who nullifies the possibility of fulfilling the mitzvah for him, as a woman is betrothed only with her consent, and he is not liable at all. If she did not designate him as an agent, is it in his power to accept betrothal on behalf of a woman who did not designate him to do so? His action is nothing, and the betrothal does not take effect. So it's not him nullifying the mitzvah, him nullifying the possibility of remarrying her. We need another solution. Rather, Rav Shimi of Narodea said he nullifies the possibility of remarriage in a case where he vowed in public that it is prohibited for him to derive benefit from her, and it is consequently prohibited for him to marry her. If a man takes a vow that he will never derive benefit from a certain woman, well, then obviously he can't marry her because spouses benefit from each other. The Gemara asks, this works out well according to the one who says that a vow that was taken in public has no nullification. He is flogged, since by taking that vow he has rendered remarriage impossible. But according to the view of the one who says that even a vow taken in public can be nullified, the vow can be nullified, then he could remarry her. So then what can be said? So the Gemara answers the reference is to a case where he vows on the basis of the consent of the public that it is prohibited for him to derive benefit from her. As the Maimar says that the law is a vow that was taken in public has the possibility of nullification. A vow that was taken on the basis of the consent of the public has no nullification. The Gemara questions Rabbi Yochanan's statement. And are there no more prohibitions that entail fulfillment of a positive mitzvah for which one is flogged? But aren't there actually others? There are other examples. And before stating its challenges, the Gemara provides a mnemonic device for remembering them. Robbery, collateral, and peah, right? The corner of the field. So the Gemara elaborates, isn't there the case of robbery, where the merciful one states, you shall not rob. Right? It's a very clear, emphatic, do not steal from other people. Do not rob means stealing from their face. Thievery is stealing when they're not looking. Okay, do not rob. And so if you rob someone, you clearly violated the negative commandment through an action. So if you were warned, don't rob. If you do, you're going to be subject to lashes, and then you rob. Okay, now you're subject to lashes. What's going on with the positive commandment? But the positive commandment might involve restitution of what you stole. You shall not rob. Said the merciful one states, you shall not rob. Leviticus 19:13. And this week's Torah portion. And also states, and he shall return the stolen item. Leviticus 5:23. So there you have restitution, positive commandment. Isn't there the case of collateral where the merciful one states, you shall not come into his house to fetch his pledge? Right, when a rich man lends to a poor man on the basis of collateral, but the only collateral the poor man has is the coat on his back or his pillow. So you can't take it from him if it's going to make it impossible for him to sleep, without freezing at night, right? Isn't there the case of collateral where the merciful one states, you shall not come into his house to fetch his pledge, the negative commandment. And it then states, you shall return to him the pledge when the sun sets. Negative commandment, positive commandment. The Gemara continues, and you find that one is liable to receive lashes in those cases, both if the criterion is whether he fulfilled the mitzvah or he did not fulfill the mitzvah, and if the criterion is whether he nullified the mitzvah or he did not nullify it. According to the first criterion, he is flogged if he fails to return the stolen item or the collateral. According to the second criterion, he is flogged if he destroys the stolen item or the collateral. And the Gemara answers, well, there in both of those cases, he is not flogged, since he is liable to remit monetary payment for the stolen item or the collateral, because we have a principle. One is not flogged and made liable to pay restitution for one transgression. Either you're flogged or you pay the damages, not both. Rabbi Zera objects to this, but isn't there the case where he is not liable to pay? For example, if he appropriated the collateral of a convert and then the convert died with no heirs. In that case, there is no payment because he's not able to return the money to one of the heirs because this was a convert without heirs. Why does it matter that it's a convert? Because all Jews, are understood to be related. Somebody who converts to Judaism, okay, he doesn't have relatives because his relatives from, his non-Jewish relatives are considered by Jewish law to be not his relatives anymore. He can have a wonderful relationship with them, but just legally speaking, they're not his relatives anymore. And if after he converted to Judaism, he didn't get married or have children, so then he has no heirs. So this guy can't, the guy who harmed him by taking collateral, now he can't return it to the man's heirs because he has none. So there's not going to be payment. So then maybe we should flog him, right? The one who took collateral from this poor convert. There is no payment, and nevertheless he is not flogged because payment would apply if the guy had heirs. He doesn't, but still, because payment would apply in such a situation, we don't flog. Now we're on page 16b, and the Gemara answers there, the man who appropriated the collateral is liable to remit monetary payment. And it is only that the lien of the convert on the property has lapsed as there is no one to receive payment. Therefore, he is not flogged based on the principle of one is not both flogged and liable to pay restitution, even if the restitution cannot be paid out in reality. The Gemara asks, but isn't there the case of payah? Right, leaving over when a farmer harvests his field, he leaves the corners unharvested so that poor people can come and eat. Right, so the case of payah, where there is a prohibition, as the merciful one states, Leviticus 23:22, you shall not completely reap the corner of your field, followed by the positive mitzvah, to the poor and the convert you shall leave them. Right? It's the same concept stated as a negative, don't reap the corners, and the positive, leave the corner for the poor. And so you find one liable to receive lashes in those cases, both if the criterion is whether he fulfilled the mitzvah or he did not fulfill the mitzvah. And if the criterion is whether he nullified the mitzvah or he did not nullify it. As we learned in the Baraisa, the mitzvah payah is to separate it from the standing grain still growing from the ground. If he did not separate it from the standing grain, but reaped the entire field, he separates a portion from the sheaves as payah. If he did not separate it from the sheaves, he separates it from the pile where one places the kernels after threshing, before he smooths the pile. Once he smooths the pile, the produce is considered grain from which one is obligated to separate terumos and tithes. If he already smoothed the pile before designating the payah, he tides the grain in the pile and then gives the payah to the poor person. Once he grinds the kernels into flour, the mitzvah of payah no longer applies. That's the whole statement of that mitzvah. Now, apparently, it is possible to nullify the possibility of fulfilling the mitzvah of leaving payah by taking the processing of the grain all the way through to grinding. So after that, you can't do payah anymore, right? So you nullified the mitzvah if you do that. By not doing the mitzvah when you should have and then continuing to process the grain, you eventually nullify the possibility of performing the mitzvah of payah. Why then did Rabbi Yochanan omit this case from his list of prohibitions rectified by a positive mitzvah for which one is flogged? Since at each step he should have done it while the grain was still standing in the field. But then he can still correct that at the next stage. He could do it through all the different stages. He could still do payah, even though he should have done it earlier, until at the end when he's grounded and it's too late to do the payah. But there were corrective mitzvahs along the way. So why is he flogged? The Gemara answers, Rabbi Yochanan holds in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yishmael, who says one separates payah even from the dough. He maintains that the possibility of fulfilling the mitzvah of payah is never fulfilled. Is never nullified, as one may separate payah even after grinding and kneading. And the Gemara challenges this, and according to Rabbi Yishmael, you also find a way to nullify the possibility of fulfilling the mitzvah in a case where one ate the dough. So rather, the Gemara retracts its previous understanding of the statement of Rabbi Yochanan. We have only this mitzvah and one other where one would be flogged if not for the relevant mitzvah. So the term this is in reference to the sending away of the mother bird, and the term another is in reference to this law of payah. But in the case of a rapist who's not permitted to divorce his wife and nevertheless he does so, no, the possibility of remarrying the rape victim whom he divorced is not nullified, even if he vows on the basis of consent of the public. Where do we say that a vow on the basis of consent of the public has no nullification? It is only in a case where one seeks nullification of the vow for the purpose of a matter that is optional. But in the case of a mitzvah, that's the reason he's seeking nullification of the vow. It may well be that we grant that nullification of his vow. So in the case of the rapist, he could seek nullification of his vow to enable him to fulfill the mitzvah of remarrying his divorcee, and therefore the vow can be nullified and the mitzvah is not nullified. The corrective mitzvah. That's why we don't flog him. The Gemara relates an incident that proves this point. As this happened in that incident where there was a certain teacher of children who was negligent in his supervision of the children. And Rav Acha vowed on the basis of the consent of the public that he would no longer be allowed to teach children, right? The leader of the community took a vow that this teacher of children will no longer be allowed to teach children in our community because he's not strict enough in his supervision of them. He was negligent. We don't want him to be teaching our children. And that was a vow with the consent of the public. And nevertheless, Ravina later restored that teacher to his position teaching the children. Why? Because no other teacher was found who was as accurate as he. Okay, he had his problems. He was imperfect, but he was the best teacher for the kids. So they needed to restore him to his position, even though the previous leader had taken a vow. Apparently, even a vow taken on the basis of the consent of the public has the possibility of nullification if the nullification is sought in order to fulfill a mitzvah, not an optional matter. Teaching Torah, of course, is a mitzvah. Now, the Mishna teaches, and one who eats unslaughtered animal or bird carcasses, that's a nevela, right? So an animal that is a kosher animal was not slaughtered in a kosher manner. That's a nevela. Or treifas, right? That's a kosher animal that was rendered unkosher because it had an injury, a wound that would result in the animal's death in less than 12 months. So it's considered like it's walking dead already. And even if you slaughtered it in a kosher manner, that kosher slaughter would not be considered a kosher slaughter because the animal was already dying. That would be a treifa. These days we often use the word treif to mean non-kosher food, but that's a very imprecise term. It only really refers to food that's not kosher because it was a kosher animal that was wounded and could die from its wound before it was slaughtered in a kosher manner. Or one who eats repugnant creatures, which the Torah specifically prohibits, or creeping animals. All these people are liable to receive lashes, right? Because don't eat that unslaughtered carcass. Don't eat that treifa. Don't eat that creeping animal. There's negative commandments in the Torah. So Rav Yehuda says, one who eats a fish-like creature found in the furrows of a field formed by a plow, we flog him due to violation of the prohibition, creeping animals that creep on the ground shall not be eaten. Leviticus 11:41. And the Gemara relates, there was a certain person who ate such a fish-like creature found in the furrows of a field formed by a plow, and Rav Yehuda flogged him. This is definitely non-kosher food. It was some kind of an eel or a snake. Abaye says, one who ate a putita, which is a creeping animal found in the sea, is flogged with 4 sets of lashes. Why 4 sets of lashes? Well, there are 2 prohibitions stated with regard to creeping animals in the sea, right? And any that do not have fins and scales in the sea and in the rivers, you shall not eat of their flesh. That's prohibition number 1. And prohibition number 2, and any that do not have fins and scales, you shall not eat. Separate prohibition. In addition, there are 2 other prohibitions stated with regard to creeping animals in general. You shall not render yourselves detestable with any creeping animal that creeps, neither shall you render yourselves impure with them. So this is a total of 4 prohibitions on eating, crayfish, let's say. So if a Jew ate that and he was warned not to, and then he did it anyway, he could theoretically be subject to 4 sets of lashes. If one ate an ant, he is flogged with 5 sets of lashes. In addition to the 2 prohibitions already stated with regard to repugnant creatures in general, he is also flogged for violating the prohibitions. Creeping animals that creep on the ground shall not be eaten, and all creeping animals that creep on the ground, you shall not eat them. And neither shall you render yourselves impure with any manner of creeping things that crawls upon the ground. Now, it's interesting because all those prohibitions sound like exactly the same. So maybe the Torah was just amplifying, repeating itself so that you would remember not to eat those insects. But since it is stated 3 times and the wording is a little bit different each time, so then any creeping thing that fulfills the definition of each of those 5 prohibitions, if somebody ate it, he could theoretically be liable to 5 sets of lashes. If one ate a wasp, he is flogged with 6 sets of lashes. In addition to the 5 prohibitions already violated by one who eats an ant, he's flogged with an additional set of lashes due to the violation for the prohibition with regard to winged creeping creatures. Deuteronomy 14:19, and all winged creeping creatures are impure for you. They may not be eaten. Rav Achai says, one who delays relieving himself through his orifices when he needs to go violates the prohibition of you shall not make your souls detestable. Leviticus 20, verse 25. Fascinating. If you need to go to the bathroom and you don't go, you are violating the prohibition on making yourself detestable. And the sages talk about this in a few other places in the Talmud, right? If you need to go, now obviously it's not always possible to go. It's not that you should, just go wherever you are and make yourself detestable by, going to the bathroom in public. But as soon as the need arises, you should start making your way to a bathroom. Don't hold it in and walk around squirming. Make it possible for yourself to go to the bathroom. Now, in the past, we've talked about that the sages strongly believe that one who holds it in is harming himself, is harming his health or her health. But here, it's saying in addition to the health danger, there's also that you're violating that particular prohibition on making yourself detestable. Rev Bevai Bar Abaye says, one who drinks from the horn of a bloodletter through which blood has passed violates the prohibition of you shall not make your souls detestable. Now that's definitely this week's Torah portion. In fact, yesterday's reading, which I was studying today, where God says to the Jews, not once, not twice, I don't think even 3 or 4 times, I think it was like maybe 5 times, just over and over and over again. You shall not eat the blood. You shall not eat the blood. When you slaughter meat, you shall pour out the blood. If you slaughter a bird, you shall pour out the blood, right? Jews are 100% prohibited and with repeated warnings in the Torah to consume blood because blood represents life, right? You can eat flesh, you can eat meat, right? You can eat cow meat, you can eat sheep meat, you can eat goat meat, you can eat bird meat like chickens, and doves, etc. Fish is a different kind of flesh, but let's just stick with mammals, right? So you can eat cows, sheep, and goats, for sure. But when you do, you have to make sure that all the blood is removed from that animal. That's part of the kosher slaughter process. And the Torah goes out of its way to repeat that over and over again. So here, in addition to violating all those prohibitions on consuming blood, they're telling you that even if you use a vessel that a bloodletter used, right? So that's a medical procedure where they would just, take blood from you to sort of even out your humors, kind of ancient world medicine. But they don't just let the blood pour out on the floor. They put it into a vessel, right? So you have to get rid of some blood. That's a medical treatment. It goes out into some kind of a basin or a cup, and then they go pour that blood out somewhere and dispose of it, probably into the ground and cover it over with dirt. If you then used that vessel, put some water into it and drank water out of it, that would be because it would have traces of blood in it, or just the fact that it was used for blood, even if it was totally dried and clean, it would still be considered detestable. Do not make yourself detestable. Rava bar Rav Huna says, if one crushed 9 ants and brought another one that was alive and thereby completed their measure to an olive bulk and ate them, right? Because minimum measure to be guilty of violating this particular prohibition, right? Because we have minimum measures when there's something you're not allowed to eat. Well, if you eat such a tiny amount, it's like you didn't really eat. But if you eat enough of it, then you did. So it sounds like here, eating creeping things, maybe the minimum measure is an olive bulk, and you need 10 ants for that. That's definitely not universal. Other opinions are going to differ. So Rava bar Rav Huna says, if one crushed 9 ants and brought another one that was alive and thereby completed their measure to an olive bulk and ate them, he is flogged with 6 sets of lashes. 5 sets for eating an entity for which one is flogged 5 times, as stated above with regard to one who eats an ant. And 1 for eating an olive bulk of an unslaughtered carcass altogether. Rava says that Rabbi Yochanan says even if he ate 2 crushed ants and the ant that was alive, he is flogged with 6 sets of lashes. Rav Yosef says even if he ate 1 crushed ant and the ant was alive. And so the Gemara comments, and they do not disagree. This case where Rav and Rav Yosef say that he is flogged for eating 1 or 2 crushed ants and one that is alive is referring to large ants, which together amount to an olive bulk of food. In that case where Rava bar Rav Huna mentions 9 ants, he is referring to small ants, as a greater number of ants is required to constitute an olive bulk and render him liable. Consequently, there is no halakhic dispute in this case. New subject. The Mishnah teaches that among those flogged is one who ate untithed produce or first tithe produce whose terum of the tithe was not taken, right? So the proper tithe was not taken from the food. A Jew cannot eat food that has not been tithed, at least when the temple is standing, and we're talking about produce from Israel. There's sort of symbolic tithing now, but certainly when the temple is standing and the sabbatical year and the tithing process are in full swing, right, where the first 2% goes to a priest, the next 10% goes to a Levite. The Levite who receives that tithe, he then has to turn around and tithe 10% to a priest also. That's teruma of the tithe. And if you eat the food before, when the tithes have not been removed from it, you're violating this prohibition. Right, so the Mishnah teaches that among those flogged is one who ate untithed produce or first tithe whose teruma was not taken. So Rav says if one ate untithed produce from which teruma and first tithe were separated and poor man's tithe was not separated, Meiser Sheni in the 3rd and 6th year, he is flogged. So the Gemara explains in accordance with whose opinion did Rav issue this ruling. It is in accordance with the opinion of this Tana as it is taught in a Baraisa that Rabbi Yosei says. One might have thought that one is liable for eating only untithed produce from which no gifts were taken at all. But if teruma gedola was taken, right, the first 2% for the priest, if that at least was taken from the produce, but the first tithe for the Levite was not taken from it, or if the first tithe was separated but not the second tithe, or even if only the poor man's tithe was not separated, from where is it derived that the halakhic status of the produce is that of untithed produce, period, and that one is liable for eating it? So the Baraisa continues, it is derived as the verse states, you may not eat within your gates the tithe of your grain or your wine or of your oil. And there it states, and you shall give to the Levite, to the convert, to the orphan, and to the widow, and they shall eat within your gates and be satisfied. So just as there with regard to the phrase, and they shall eat within your gates, it is referring to poor man's tithe, here too. You may not eat within your gates is referring to produce in which there is poor man's tithe that has not yet been separated. And the merciful one states a prohibition. You may not eat it. Right? So if you eat food from which any tithe has not been taken that needs to be taken, you violate this prohibition. Rav Yosef said this matter is subject to a dispute between Tanaim. Rabbi Eliezer says one need not separate by means of calling the name upon poor man's tithe of doubtfully tithed produce, known as demai. With regard to produce purchased from an ignorant person, an am haaretz, i.e. one who is unreliable with regard to tithes, there is a rabbinic ordinance requiring one to separate first and second tithe and teruma of the tithe from it. Maybe the am haaretz did tithe it, but since we can't be sure, now the pious person has to do the tithing process from scratch. Nevertheless, one is not required to separate poor man's tithe from that produce because poor man's tithe is a monetary debt owed to the poor. And in a case of uncertainty, the principle is the burden of proof rests on the claimant. Rabbi Eliezer holds that failure to separate poor man's tithe from demai does not accord the produce status of untithed produce, as it would in the first instance of the person who is supposed to be tithing it, and when he's not sure if he tithed or not, and he ate it, then he'd be liable to the prohibition. But where you're buying it from an Am Haaretz who might have already tithed it, and then you don't complete the tithing process to create the poor man's tithe, if the only part missing was the poor man's tithe, then you would not have violated the prohibition. That's the view of Rabbi Eliezer. And the rabbis say he designates a portion of the produce by means of calling the name upon poor man's tithe, but he's not required to physically separate that portion and give it to the poor. Now we're on page 17a. I'm almost done. Questions or comments, please get them in. Rav Yosef suggests, what is it not that they disagree with regard to this? That one sage, the rabbis, hold. Whoops. Let me just get the question document ready for myself. That one sage, meaning the rabbis, holds that produce from which poor man's tithe was certainly not separated is rendered untithed produce, and therefore in a case where there is uncertainty whether poor man's tithe was separated, one is required to separate it. And the other sage, Rabbi Eliezer, holds that produce from which poor man's tithe was certainly not separated is not rendered untithed produce, and therefore one need not even designate poor man's tithe by calling its name upon the portion of the produce. And Abaye said to Rav Yosef, if it is so that this is the point in dispute, rather than disagreeing with regard to a case of uncertainty whether poor man's tithe was separated or not, let them disagree with regard to a case of certainty that poor man's tithe was not separated. So rather, contrary to the previous suggestion, say that everyone agrees that produce from which poor man's tithe was certainly not separated is rendered untithed produce. And here it is with regard to this that they disagree, right? What is the uncertainty? If we know that the tithe wasn't separated, okay, then it's untithed. If we're just not sure whether it was separated or not, then... And here it is with regard to this that they disagree. One sage, Rabbi Eliezer, holds, Amei haaretz, right? These ignorant people who were not sure if they tithed or not, they're not suspected of refraining from separating poor man's tithe of demai. Since it is merely a matter of money and no sanctity is involved, he separates poor man's tithe, although he does not actually give it to the poor. And the rabbis hold, since the matter involves exertion for him, he does not even separate poor man's tithe, so we're going to assume that he didn't. The Mishnah teaches, how much does one need to eat from untithed produce to be liable to receive lashes? Rabbi Shimon says, even if one ate any amount of untithed produce, he is liable to receive lashes. And the rabbis say he is liable only if he eats an olive bulk. Rabbi Bevai says that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says their dispute is with regard to one who eats one kernel of wheat of untithed produce. But with regard to flour, everyone agrees that one is liable only if he eats an olive bulk. And Rabbi Yirmiyah says that Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish says, just as there is a dispute with regard to this case of a kernel of wheat, so too there is a dispute with regard to that case of flour. And the Gemara cites proof from that which we learned in the Mishnah. Rabbi Shimon said to them, do you concede to me with regard to one who eats an ant of any size that he is liable to receive lashes? And the rabbi said to Rabbi Shimon, he is flogged for eating any amount, for eating an ant of any size due to the fact that it is an intact entity in the form of its creation, right? Even though it's a very tiny creature that's much less than an olive bulk, but it is a whole ant that, is made like the way God made it and can walk around. So if you eat that, you violate the prohibition on eating creeping things, even though it's so tiny. But you did it on purpose and you were warned, etc. The rabbi said to Rabbi Shimon, he is flogged for eating an ant of any size due to the fact that it is an intact entity in the form of its creation. Rabbi Shimon said to them, one kernel of wheat is also in the form of its creation. So the Gemara infers from Rabbi Shimon's response, for a kernel of wheat, yes, one is liable. For any amount of flour, no. It has to be an olive bulk. Less than that, it's not this unit of creation like a kernel of wheat is. It's just a little bit of flour that was ground. So apparently, even Rabbi Shimon concedes that one is liable for eating only an olive bulk of wheat flour, in accordance with the statement of Rabbi Bevai that Rabbi Bevai says to Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. So the Gemara says, it is in accordance with the statement of the rabbis that Rabbi Shimon spoke to them. And he meant like this. According to my opinion, even if one ate any amount of flour, he's also liable. But according to your opinion, concede to me at least that one is liable if he eats one kernel of wheat, as it is in the form of its creation. The rabbi said in response, there is a difference. An entity with a soul, even an ant, That's a living creature. That is significant because it has some kind of a soul, an animal soul, and one is liable for eating an entity of any volume. A kernel of wheat is not significant. Yes, it's alive, but plants don't have souls. A kernel of wheat is not significant. So the Gemara notes it is taught in a Baraisa in accordance with the opinion of Rabbi Yirmiyah. The Rabbi Shimon says one who eats any amount of food that is forbidden is liable to receive lashes. The sages said the measure of an olive bulk only with regard to liability to bring a sin offering for one who unwittingly ate forbidden food. And that concludes our discussion of Mishnah number 1 here in chapter 3. We'll pick it up tomorrow at the regular Thursday time, 6 p.m. Pacific. The conflict that I thought I had that was going to require us to go an hour early tomorrow, that got postponed to a fundraiser that's going to be next month. So tomorrow, regular time. Okay, Sharon, if you are eating an apple or corn on the cob, you can inadvertently eat all or part of a worm. How is that addressed? Right, and that's why, of course, there's all kinds of foods that are problematic for somebody who eats kosher. And you have to wash. Kale, apparently, very easily could have little creeping things in it. Certain kinds of berries could easily have creeping things in it. And so you have to wash them very carefully. So how stringent is a person going to be? What is the level of care required? It can always happen that no matter how hard and how carefully you wash it, an accident happens. So that was something that was done unwittingly. If it was foreseeable, hey, if you eat that corn, which I happen to know is infested with worms, you will have violated this prohibition, then he does it anyway, then maybe he is flogged. Right? And so those are the kinds of issues there. Joseph, last question. Is the punishment of lashes always the same number of lashes? Is the implementation always the same no matter the issue? So we haven't gotten to that yet. It seems like the basic unit of flogging is 40 lashes, or some would say 40 minus 1, 39. So if there's any kind of a flogging offense, we go to that number, or is there a lesser number? Stay tuned. There's also the possibility of who's doing the lashing. You can imagine that some people, are kind of weak or just not very bloodthirsty, and they will lash kind of softly and it won't hurt so much. And some other agents of the court might lash very hard. What kind of quality control do we have here when the punishment of lashes is being administered? Stay tuned. With God's help, see you all tomorrow, regular time.